Hi, everybody. My name is Kelsey Varzies, and I'm back with installment number 2 of the Note Taking Strategies video series. In this video, we are going to talk for tips for taking great notes, what to include in notes, course specific ideas, and note format. So join me in learning a little bit more about how to take better notes. So first, we're going to talk about what to include in notes. So what's really important when taking notes, whether you're in an online lecture, in person, or watching a recorded lecture, is noticing when instructors identify emphasis in their voice. So this might be changes in volume or tone of their voice, whether they speak slowly, whether they repeat information, pauses while delivering information. So, those long, drawn out pauses where they clearly want you to write something down, whether they conclude or summarize the information given. So, if they start to summarize what's been talked about during class or in a specific area, that is a really great moment in time to, take note of the fact that they're probably emphasizing something. Or they use emphatic language. So, emphatic language are things like this will be important or blank is important for this reason. So those are some things to include in your notes is really just noticing when and identifying when instructors emphasize certain areas of the course lecture. Now, as you all probably know, there are a variety of different courses that are offered not only at OSU, but at other higher education institutions across the country. And so, when taking notes, it's really important to take notes that are specific towards the course. So, we're going to go through a few here and see how these might be helpful to you. So, first and foremost, a discussion based course where you may be reading articles and bringing them to the discussion to talk about. So, in a discussion based course, you want to take notes in the following manner. So, first, you want to organize based on the question that's posed. So, it might be helpful to write down the specific question and then jot down any ideas that people bring forward about how they went about answering the question. You want to track themes that you're noticing in common answers of the question. You want to write down your own questions. So, as the conversation is going on, what sorts of questions do you have? Or potentially, what sorts of questions do you have on the readings? And then indicate who spoke. That's a really important part because if you're trying to remember, who was speaking or what was going on, it might be really nice to be able to, cite that person in a future paper or just help to better recall, what was being said. The next are math and science courses. So, for math and science courses, you want to write down problems and solutions for reference. So, if you have to go back and either study for an exam or, if it builds on other material, it's really helpful to have, problems and solutions to look back on. You also want to include what the name of the problem was, if there was a specific formula that was used. You want to write down your thoughts along with that. So, do you have any confusion around certain topics or certain ideas about that specific problem? And then you also want to include, like I said prior, formulas and diagrams. So, how did you get to this point in time in determining this equation or this solution? And lastly, you want to write down page numbers to refer to. So if the specific example is from a textbook or there's a certain definition from the textbook, it's always really helpful and very beneficial to write down the page number that is associated with that specific problem or solution. The next is PowerPoint heavy, and we all know these classes where a professor or an instructor puts up a PowerPoint and they really just lecture from the PowerPoint. So here are some tips for including that. So the first is you want to break up your notes with numbered sections that connect to the slides, or maybe it might be helpful to write down the slide number in and of itself. You also want to focus on explanations and supporting details. So it's not necessarily about copying down all that's on the PowerPoint, but maybe it's about considering, what is going on here and trying to explain what is going on in your own words. And then lastly, you want to write down your own thoughts or ideas. So jumping off my last point, it's really beneficial to synthesize the material not only from what the professor or instructor is providing you with, but also making sure that you write down your own thoughts or ideas to help encode the information into your brain. Lastly, we're going to talk about note format. And I think a really good caveat here is that note format is going to depend on contextual variables. So, first and foremost, when we think about the format of notes, it's important to consider whether the notes are going to be handwritten or via computer. And that's preference, right? There's no right or wrong way to write notes. It's just dependent on what is easiest for you. So some things to consider whether you're choosing between, excuse me, handwritten versus computer notes. So are you looking at distractions? Do you get more distracted on your computer with checking your email or social media or anything along those lines? Accessibility after the fact, are you able to maintain all of your notes if they're handwritten in binders or notebooks, or is it easier just to keep it on the computer? Organization. So do you have sloppy handwriting that you're not going to be able to recognize later on? Or is it just easier to have everything in one place on your computer? Storage. So, like I said before, are you going to have binders and binders of storage or notebooks? Or is it easier to have it on your computer? Or is it taking up too much space on your computer? And then usage in all classes. So, is it easier to carry multiple notebooks around campus for you, or is it harder? So these are just things to consider when choosing whether to handwrite your notes or to use computer-based platforms. Secondly, we want to consider whether the modalities of the class are live lectures or recorded lectures. So, in either scenario, you don't want to try to copy down everything that the instructor says. That's kind of a waste of time, especially if you're given the PowerPoint later on. For recorded lectures, I always suggest to folks that it's really helpful to utilize the pause button. You have the opportunity to pause the lecture and really just tune into what's going on. And in a live section, if or a live lecture, excuse me, it's always really helpful, to pause and ask questions. It's kind of mimics the idea of pushing the pause button on a recorded lecture. With regards to readings, finding a system and sticking with it that works well for you is essential. So don't be afraid if you've never tried this to try a bunch of different reading systems and a bunch of different note-taking systems just to see what works best for you. And then you also want to mark what catches your eye in the reading, or mark down any questions you might have. Overall, though, what's really important, no matter what type of note format that you utilize or what type of lecture you're in, or whatever type of reading you're doing, you want to make sure that you summarize in your own words what is being said and you're not copying verbatim. What this does is it helps encode the information into your brain so that you're learning it better rather than just copying it word for word. Alrighty, thank you so much for joining me for part 2 of this video series on note-taking strategies. Next week, we'll be back with video 3 on how to visually organize your notes. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again soon.